Gulliver's Travels, A Voyage to Brobdingnag, Chapter 2. A description of the farmer's daughter, the author carried to a market town, and then to the metropolis. The particulars of his journey. My mistress had a daughter of 9 years old, a child of forward parts for her age, very dexterous at her needle, and skilful in dressing her baby. Her mother and she contrived to fit up the baby's cradle for me against the night. The cradle was put into a small drawer of a cabinet, and the drawer placed upon a hanging shelf for fear of the rats. This was my bed all the time I stayed with those people, though made more convenient by degrees as I began to learn their language and make my wants known. This young girl was so handy that after I had once or twice pulled off my clothes before her, she was able to dress and undress me, though I never gave her that trouble when she would let me do either myself. She made me 7 shirts and some other linen, of as fine cloth as could be got, which indeed was coarser than sackcloth, and these she constantly washed for me with her own hands. She was likewise my schoolmistress to teach me the language. When I pointed to anything, she told me the name of it in her own tongue, so that in a few days I was able to call for whatever I had a mind to. She was very good-natured and not above 40 feet high, being little for her age. She gave me the name of Grildreg, which the family took up, and afterwards the whole kingdom. The word imports what the Latins call nan unculus, the Italians homon salutino, and the English manikin. To her I chiefly owe my preservation in that country. We never parted while I was there. I call her my Guldalclitch, or little nurse. And I should be guilty of great ingratitude if I omitted this honorable mention of her care and affection toward me, which I heartily wish it lay in my power to requite as she deserves, instead of being the innocent but unhappy instrument of her disgrace, as I have too much reason to fear. It now began to be known and talked of in the neighborhood that my master had found a strange animal in the field, about the bigness of a splacknuck, but exactly shaped in every part like a human creature, which it likewise imitated in all its actions, seemed to speak in a little language of its own, had already learned several words of theirs, went erect upon 2 legs, was tame and gentle, would come when it was called, do whatever it was bid, and had the finest limbs in the world, and a complexion fairer than a nobleman's daughter of 3 years old. Another farmer, who lived hard by, and was a particular friend of my master, came on a visit on purpose to inquire about the truth of this story. I was immediately produced and placed upon a table, where I walked as I was commanded, drew my hanger, put it up again, made my reverence to my master's guest, asked him in his own language how he did, and told him he was welcome, just as my little nurse had instructed me. This man, who was old and dim-sighted, put on his spectacles to behold me better, at which I could not forbear laughing very heartily, for his eyes appeared like the full moon shining in a chamber at 2 windows. Our people, who discovered the cause of my mirth, bore me company in laughing, at which the old fellow was fool enough to be angry and out of countenance. He had the character of a great miser, and to my misfortune he well deserved it by the cursed advice he gave my master to show me as a sight upon a market day in the next town, which was half an hour's riding, about 22 miles from our house. I guess there was some mischief contriving, when I observed my master and his friend whispering along together, sometimes pointing at me, and my fears made me fancy that I overheard and understood some of their words. But the next morning, Glumdalclitch, my little nurse, told me the whole matter, which she had cunningly picked out from her mother. The poor girl laid me on her bosom and fell a-weeping with shame and grief. She apprehended some mischief would happen to me from rude vulgar folk, who might squeeze me to death or break one of my limbs by taking me in their hands. She had also observed how modest I was in my nature, how nicely I regarded my honor, And what an indignity I should conceive it to be exposed for money as a public spectacle to the meanest of the people. She said her papa and mamma had promised that Grildreg should be hers, but now she found that they meant to serve her as they did last year, when they pretended to give her a lamb, and yet, as soon as it was fat, sold it to a butcher. For my own part, I may truly affirm that I was less concerned than my nurse. I had a strong hope which never left me that I should one day recover my liberty. And as to the ignominy of being carried about for a monster, I considered myself to be a perfect stranger in the country, and that such a misfortune could never be charged upon me as a reproach if ever I should return to England, since the King of Great Britain himself, in my condition, must have undergone the same distress. My master, pursuant to the advice of his friend, carried me in a box the next market day to the neighboring town, and took along with him his little daughter, my nurse, upon a pillion behind him. The box was close in every side, with a little door for me to go in and out, and a few gimlet holes to let in air. The girl had been so careful as to put the quilt of her baby's bed into it for me to lie down on. However, I was terribly shaken and discomposed by this journey, though it was but of a half an hour, for the horse went about 40 feet at every step, and trotted so high that the agitation was equal to the rising and falling of a ship in a great storm, but much more frequent. Our journey was somewhat further than from London to St. Albans. My master alighted at an inn, which he used to frequent, and after consulting a while with the innkeeper and making some necessary preparations, he hired the Grultrude, or crier, to give notice through the town of a strange creature to be seen at the sign of the Green Eagle, not so big as a splatnook, an animal in that country very finely shaped, about 6 feet long, and in every part of the body resembling a human creature, could speak several words and perform 100 diverting tricks. I was placed upon a table in the largest room of the inn, which might be near 300 feet square. My little nurse stood on a low stool close to the table to take care of me and direct what I should do. My master, to avoid a crowd, would suffer only 30 people at a time to see me. I walked about on the table as the girl commanded. She asked me questions as far as she knew my understanding of the language reached, and I answered them as loud as I could. I turned about several times to the company, paid my humble respects, said they were welcome, and used some other speeches I had been taught. I took up a thimble filled with liquor, which Glumdalclitch had given me for a cup, and drank their health. I drew out my hanger and flourished it, after the manner of fencers in England. My nurse gave me part of a straw, which I exercised as a pike, having learned the art in my youth. I was that day shown to 12 sets of company, and as often forced to go over again with the same fopperies, till I was half dead with weariness and vexation. For those who had seen me made such wonderful reports that the people were ready to break down the doors to come in. My master, for his own interest, would not suffer anyone to touch me except my nurse, and to prevent danger, benches were set around the table at such a distance as to put me out of everybody's reach. However, an unlucky schoolboy aimed a hazelnut directly at my head, which very narrowly missed me. Otherwise, it came with so much violence that it would have infallibly knocked out my brains, for it was almost as large as a small pumpkin. But I had the satisfaction to see the young rogue well beaten and turned out of the room. My master gave public notice that he would show me again the next market day, and in the meantime he prepared a more convenient vehicle for me, which he had reason enough to do. For I was so tired with my first journey, and with entertaining company for 8 hours together, that I could hardly stand upon my legs or speak a word. It was at least 3 days before I recovered my strength, and that I might have no rest at home, all the neighboring gentlemen from 100 miles round, hearing of my fame, came to see me at my master's own house. There could not be fewer than 30 persons with their wives and children, for the country is very populous, and my master demanded the rate of a full room whenever he showed me at home, although it were only a single family, so that for some time I had but little ease every day for a week. except Wednesday, which is their Sabbath, although I were not carried to the town. My master, finding how profitable I was like to be, resolved to carry me to the most considerable cities of the kingdom. Having therefore provided himself with all things necessary for a long journey and settled his affairs at home, he took leave of his wife, and upon the 17th of August, 1703, about 2 months after my arrival, we set out for the metropolis, situated near the middle of that empire, and about 3,000 miles distant from our house. My master made his daughter, Glumdalclitch, ride behind him. She carried me on her lap in a box tied about her waist. The girl had lined it on all sides with the softest cloth she could get, well quilted underneath, furnished it with her baby's bed, provided me with linen and other necessaries, and made everything as convenient as she could. We had no other company but a boy of the house, who rode after us with the luggage. My master's design was to show me in all the towns by the way, and to step out of the road for 50 or 100 miles to any village or person of quality's house where he might expect custom. We made easy journeys of not above 7 or 8 score miles a day, for Glumdalclitch, on purpose to spare me, complained she was tired with the trotting of the horse. She often took me out of my box at my own desire to give me air and show me the country, but always held me fast by a leading string. We passed over 5 or 6 rivers, many degrees broader and deeper than the Nile or the Ganges, and there was hardly a rivulet so small as the Thames or London Bridge. We were 10 weeks in our journey, and I was shown in 18 large towns, besides many villages and private families. On the 26th day of October, we arrived at the metropolis, called in their language Lorbrulgrud, or Pride of the Universe. My master took a lodging in the principal street of the city, not far from the royal palace, and put out bills in the usual form, containing an exact description of my person and parts. He hired a large room between 300 and 400 feet wide. He provided a table 60 feet in diameter, upon which I was to act my part, and palisadoed around 3 feet from the edge and as many high, to prevent my falling over. I was shown 10 times a day, to the wonder and satisfaction of all people. I could now speak the language tolerably well, and perfectly understood every word that was spoken to me. Besides, I had learned their alphabet and could make a shift to explain a sentence here and there, for Glumdalclitch had been my instructor while we were at home, and at leisure hours during our journey. She carried a little book in her pocket, not much larger than a Sanson's Atlas. It was a common treatise for the use of young girls, giving a short account of their religion. Out of this, she taught me my letters and interpreted the words. And we're going to pause here, and we'll go on with Chapter 3 in the next video. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.